A new investigation reveals that children in Illinois are being locked away, terrified and alone at schools for reasons that often violate the law. RT's Brigida Santos joins me now from LA to talk about it. First of all, Brigida, why are children being isolated at schools to begin with? What's the story about?
Well, children are often sent into isolation as a form of timeout. In Illinois, it's legal for school employees to put children in a separate room if they pose a safety threat to themselves or others. But a new investigation of timeout logs reveals that school workers in at least 100 districts have been isolating children for reasons that are not legally permitted, including swearing, spilling milk, and refusing to do assignments, for example. So far, journalists have tallied up over 20,000 incidents between the fall of 2017 through December of 2018. Now, out of those, only 12,000 reports were detailed enough to determine what prompted seclusion, and in 42% of those cases, no safety concern was even documented.
You know, ProPublica looked at this, and the numbers that they reviewed are startling. You talked about some of those numbers. But what they found was a pretty ugly pattern, and they say there's supposed to be somebody standing outside the room when these children are isolated in basically padded rooms, taking notes about what's happening minute to minute. But the problem is nobody's reviewing those notes. And that brings me to the question, how old are these children, and how did they react to being locked up? What are some of the stories here? It must be pretty bad. ProPublica did an entire expose on this story.
Yes, many of these children are as young as 5 years old. And according to the timeout logs, most of the students who end up in isolation are either physically or mentally disabled or suffer from behavioral disorders like autism. Now, because the adults are legally required to stand outside the door and write down what happens, as you said, we know that in isolation, students have injured themselves while scratching at the windows and tearing at padded walls. They've even thrown their bodies against locked doors, hit their heads, and gotten bruises. Their hands have bled from banging on the doors, and in some cases, they've even wet their pants. Now, the median time that students have been kept in isolation is 26 minutes, but some of these students have been locked up for hours or been locked up on multiple occasions. Records also reveal the heartbreaking things that some of these kids have said during seclusion. For example, one child screamed, "I'd rather die, you're torturing me," while in isolated timeout. Workers and teachers say that seclusion helps keep everyone in class safe. They also claim that it helps children learn to calm themselves down. But in 2012, the U.S. Department of Education warned against seclusion, saying it's dangerous and that there's absolutely no evidence that it reduces behavioral issues. And special education experts agree. They say isolation has no therapeutic or educational value and that it can actually traumatize children.
Well, you know, a lot of states use isolation now. I mean, I understand this is being looked at right now, and it should be with these stories, but it seems like this is a little bit wider than just Illinois. I mean, if these incidents are illegal, why isn't anybody cracking down on the practice to begin with? I mean, why is this even taking place?
Yeah, it's not strictly happening in Illinois. Now, at least 19 states, though, have banned seclusion, but there are no federal laws regulating the practice. And even though Illinois school workers are legally required to file those detailed reports about the incidents, no one's required to read them, which means that state education officials are not monitoring these types of timeouts. People are now questioning whether our tax dollars should fund schools that illegally lock up children. So hopefully this investigation will raise awareness and result in some much needed systemic changes.
Well, and to me, you can't miss this. You can't miss this point about the story. This isn't just the average child that misbehaves. These children have all kinds of disabilities. They're mixed up with kids that are also put into these same rooms. So they're just behavioral problems. So this goes beyond just trying to correct behavioral problems. These are children that have some real fundamental disabilities, and that's easy to miss in this story. Anyway, Brigida, thank you for joining me, okay?
Thanks, Mike.
Freshwater scarcity is a growing concern across many U.S. households, and Nestle's managed to send alarm bells ringing among environmental activists in Florida who are fighting against the company's request to dramatically increase how much fresh water it extracts for bottling every year. I have legal journalist Molly Barrows here to walk us through this. Molly, exactly how much fresh water is Nestle stealing from the American public.
Well, they would like to steal about 1.2 million gallons a day.
In Florida alone.
In Florida alone.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I'm looking into this, I realize that these the complaints that environmentalists have about Nestle here are popping up all over the country, all over the world. But in this particular case, this is Ginnie Springs, Gilchrist County, Florida, and this one particular company. Let's see, what's it called? Seven Springs. They're the ones that actually have the permit to the wells. And they've been working with bottled water companies for a number of years. And for the past 20 years, even though their permit says they can take up to 1.2 million gallons, they've really traditionally only taken about a quarter of that. Well, now Nestle has asked to take the full amount. And environmentalists and local activists are really upset about it because they say that studies have shown these water levels are already low. You've got the nearby Santa Fe River. 4 years ago, they did some studies and they found that it's already low. Part of the reason it's low is because of groundwater pumping as well. You've got nearby agriculture sites. But in essence, these springs are starting to drop, and they're saying if we let Nestle take all this water, it's going to cause problems for the environment.
Let's distill this water.
Yes.
Here it is. Here's how we boil this water down. Nestle is taking a natural resource from Florida and not paying anything.
Just the $115 permit fee.
$115. They take
Application fee.
1.3 million gallons of water. Nobody gets paid for it. Nestle puts it in a bottle, sells it for God knows how much of an increase. Taxpayers have to pay. And this is the other part of it. Nestle then externalizes all the risk to Florida if we have a water shortage.
That's right.
If we have a problem from this, taxpayers have to pay this. They had the same problem in California, didn't they?
Yes.
They got really hammered in California for
San
this.
Bernardino Forest. I mean, this has been an ongoing thing for a long time. State regulators are saying you're taking this water illegally. You basically pumped it dry in a place that's prone to forest fires. As you know, we're handling litigation with the Woolsey fire out there. But at any rate, this has been an ongoing situation with Nestle saying we've got full rights to take this. 45 million gallons alone last year that they took from a drought-infested area.
They don't have rights if activists get involved. Are activists getting involved in this thing?
They are. Activists and state regulators in California are involved. Activists are definitely getting involved in the Ginnie Springs thing as well. In fact, there is a petition, change.org, basically saying stop Nestle from bottling Florida's water at Ginnie Springs. Their goal is 75,000 signatures. They've almost got 74,000. So there's a lot of push. There's a lot of support against this because even though agricultural companies request larger permits than what Nestle's asking to take from Ginnie Springs, the problem is there is so much, the water levels are lowering because of groundwater pumping, because of agriculture, and they see this as an opportunity to really bring to light that Florida is not managing their water properly.
I'm trying to understand how in the world the Florida residents have any benefit here. There's zero benefit. So this cat, Seven Springs, comes in. He bought the water rights. That's all he did. It's like an oil company going and I want to buy your mineral rights. I want to buy your oil rights in Texas. Okay?
Access to the well.
Same thing. So this guy owns those water rights. Now he's saying I'm going to basically sell them. I'm going to make a profit
off a natural resource.
Off a natural resource that I'm selling now to Nestle. The taxpayer has to bear the brunt of that.
Right.
Nestle pays nothing to the taxpayer.
And it's
zero.
And it's coming up over and over again. In Michigan, there's complaints about the Dead River. They've pumped millions of gallons out of that. It's a constant battle back and forth, legal battles in court between the state of Michigan as well as Nestle over their access to those natural resources. There's a small town in France that's basically saying the same thing. That Nestle,
South America, they ran them out of part of South America.
Interesting. But it's over and over again the same thing. How do they come in? I'm curious. I'd like to look into some more and just basically say, what, do they get permission from, like you said, the person who has the permit or maybe the private landowner, and then they basically steal what could potentially flow on to benefit everyone, like taxpayers and citizens?
What if you're a taxpayer living along the river that's already projected to be affected by this? Now, Nestle comes back and says what they always say, oh, well, it's only going to be a half an inch, if anything, over the next 10 years. So you hear those types
That's exactly what Seven Springs said about Ginnie Springs. They said, y'all are just worrying about nothing. We've done some studies, and the amount they want to take, it's only going to affect the water levels by lowering it less than an inch.
And they say that because they're the ones making the money. Nestle's is making the money. Seven Springs, who sells this to Nestle's, making the money. And it's a natural resource that is owned by the commons. It's owned by the commons, the taxpayers. And all of a sudden, we ignore that like, well, that's just not important.
Well, people need to check out this online petition. They need to read up on this as well.
Yeah, let's put it up on our screen so people can actually file a petition if they want to.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining me, Molly.
Thanks, Pat.
This is an important message for our nation's veterans. If you served our country in the military between 2003 and 2015 and you suffered significant hearing loss, you might be entitled to compensation. Because the hearing protection you were issued may be at fault for the damage you suffered, but you need to act now. Your time to make a claim might be limited. Learn more at levinlaw.com/earplugs.